Chapter 1. The Stranger at Sundown. The sun bled across the horizon, spilling its last fire over the plains as dust swirled along the lone road leading into Red River. The town seemed to hold its breath in that hour before nightfall, the hour when ranch hands drifted in for whiskey, when drifters looked for trouble, and when shadows grew long across the clapboard storefronts. Luke Carson rode slow into town, his broad-shouldered frame hunched against the saddle, hat brim tilted low. His horse's hooves clopped against the packed dirt, spurs jingling in the silence. He wasn't looking to stay. He never did. But tonight felt different, like the air itself was thick with a promise he couldn't quite name. From the corner saloon, warm lamplight spilled across the street. Music tinkled from a weary piano, drowned out now and then by laughter and the scrape of boots. Luke swung down, boots sinking in the dust, and tied his reins to the post. He paused a moment, listening. A coyote's distant howl floated on the prairie wind, and for the first time in months, Luke wondered if he might linger a while. Inside, the saloon smelled of smoke and whiskey, of sweat and hard miles. Men leaned over card tables, voices raised in bluffs and curses, while the barkeep slid mugs down the counter. But Luke's eyes found her almost at once. Clara. She moved through the room with a tray balanced steady, her dark dress brushing against creaking floorboards. Her hair was pinned neat, though a few curls had slipped loose to frame her face in the lamplight. She wasn't smiling like the painted girls by the piano. She wore the look of someone who'd carried too much alone, and would sooner bite than beg for help. Luke eased against the bar, watching. He hadn't meant to stare, but his chest tightened at the sight of her. She noticed, too. Her eyes, clear, sharp as glass, cut across the room to him. "You lost, Cowboy?" she asked, voice low but carrying. The men nearby chuckled, waiting for him to stumble over himself. Luke only touched the brim of his hat. "Maybe, but I reckon I found the best whiskey in town." "That depends who's buying," Clara said, arching a brow. Before Luke could answer, a ranch hand jostled past her rougher than need be, nearly spilling her tray. Her eyes flashed, but before she could retort, Luke stepped forward, steadying her arm. "You all right, ma'am?" Clara pulled back, chin lifting. "I don't need your saving, Cowboy." The words were sharp, but her breath caught all the same, and Luke saw it, the crack in her armor. He tipped his hat again, slow, a half-smile tugging his mouth. "No, ma'am, but maybe you could use a friend." The saloon's noise swelled around them, cards slapping, boots stomping, but for a moment the world narrowed to the dusty air between them, and though Clara turned away, Luke knew the pull had already begun. Chapter 2. Whiskey, Cards, and Trouble. The night had settled heavy over Red River. The streets outside hushed, but the saloon alive with smoke and noise. Lanterns swung on iron hooks, their glow catching dust motes that hung in the air like gold flecks. The piano man hammered out a crooked tune, drowned in part by laughter, curses, and the shuffle of cards across scarred wooden tables. Luke sat in the far corner, hat tipped low, a hand of cards fanned lazily between his callous fingers. He wasn't playing for winnings. Money never held him long. He was watching the way men drank too quick, watching the way hands strayed toward holsters when whiskey soured tempers, and most of all, watching Clara. She moved from table to table, her tray clinking with glasses, her eyes steady even when men tried leaning too close. Luke admired the way she carried herself, like a woman who had built her own armor after the world had tried to strip her bare. A card player at Luke's table, thin as a rail, with a scar dragging down his cheek, leaned in with a sneer. "You playin' or dreamin', Cowboy?" Luke's gaze flicked down at his hand, then back up, calm as ever. "Both, I reckon." He tossed a coin into the pot, his smirk barely visible beneath the brim of his hat. The rail-thin man muttered, but said no more. Luke's attention drifted again, just in time to see Clara cornered near the back wall. A ranch hand, broad-shouldered and drunk, blocked her path, his breath thick with liquor. "Come on now, darling. One smile, that's all I ask." Clara tried to step aside, but the man shifted, his meaty hand catching her wrist. She stiffened, her tray tilting dangerously. Luke's chair scraped the floor, loud enough to hush a few nearby voices. He rose slow, rolling his shoulders, boots thudding on the creaking boards. "Let the lady go," he said, voice even but carrying. The ranch hand turned, lips curling. "This ain't your business." Luke's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his belt, but didn't touch the Colt at his hip. Instead, he stepped closer, eyes hard. "I'm making my business." The silence before storm hung thick. Then the ranch hand shoved Clara aside and swung. Luke ducked, fists snapping up like thunder. The crack of knuckles against jaw echoed through the saloon. Chairs scraped, men cursed, and in a blink the place erupted. Cards scattered. A bottle shattered against the floor. The brawl rolled across the room like a prairie fire, wild, fast, and uncontrollable. Luke fought with the calm fury of a man who'd seen too many saloons turn to chaos. He swung, blocked, and drove his boot into the gut of one man, sending him crashing into a table. The piano player stopped, hands hovering over keys, before wisely slipping out the side door. Clara stood pressed against the wall, breath coming fast, eyes locked on Luke. For a heartbeat, fear and anger warred across her face. Fear of violence, anger at her own pounding heart. When the last ranch hand stumbled out into the street, clutching his ribs, the saloon fell to ragged silence. Men picked up cards, grumbling, pretending nothing had happened. Luke, sweat streaking his brow, straightened his hat and turned toward Clara. "You all right?" Her tray was empty, her hair fallen loose from its pins. She glared, though her voice shook with something softer. "I told you, Cowboy, I don't need saving." Luke gave a slow nod, lips curving in that half-smile again. "Maybe not, but it looks like I'll keep doing anyhow." Clara's chest rose, fell, and for the briefest second, she let herself hold his gaze. Then, with a toss of her chin, she turned back to her bar, yet the memory of his fists and his words burned hotter than the whiskey she poured. Chapter 3, Secrets in the Dark. The streets of Red River lay hushed beneath a veil of starlight, the earlier brawl already fading into murmured gossip behind saloon doors. The air smelled of dust and sage carried on a cool night breeze, and somewhere beyond town, a lone coyote sang to the moon. Clara walked briskly along the boardwalk, her skirts brushing the wooden planks. Chin held high, though her heart still pounded from the chaos inside. She hadn't asked for help, yet Luke Carson had given it anyway. Fists flying, eyes steady, a storm in a man's frame. And now, as her boots clicked past the last lit window, she felt it before she saw him, the heavy stillness of someone waiting. He leaned against the corral fence near the livery, arms folded, his hat shadowing most of his face. His horse snorted softly behind him, restless. "You follow all the ladies home, or just the ones that don't thank you?" Clara asked, her voice sharp enough to cut the quiet. Luke straightened, the faintest grin tugging his lips. "Just the ones with men too drunk to know when to quit." She stopped a few paces away, the lamplight painting gold along her cheekbones. "I told you before, Cowboy, I don't need saving." "I know." He tipped his hat back, revealing eyes that caught the starlight. "But you might need someone riding close enough to make sure the night stays quiet." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, Clara didn't have a retort ready. The truth was, since her husband's death, she'd walked these streets alone, carrying her father's saloon on her back while fending off the wolves who circled. Loneliness had become a second skin, and this man's calm presence scraped against it in ways she didn't want to admit. They walked in silence for a stretch, boots crunching gravel. The town behind them faded, until the prairie opened wide, lit only by moon and stars. Clara slowed near the edge of the road, her breath rising in white clouds. My husband, she swallowed, words catching like thorns. He died in the range war. He was shot down, and I buried him myself. I swore then I'd never tie myself to another man who lived by the gun. Luke's jaw worked, but he said nothing at first. He simply looked out toward the dark horizon, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. Finally, his voice came low, steady as a creek in spring. I've lived by the gun long enough. Truth is, I'm tired of drifting from town to town, tired of watching sunsets alone. A man starts wondering if there's more than whiskey and card tables. Clara's breath hitched. The honesty in his voice was too raw, too close to the ache she'd buried. She turned her face away, blinking hard. Luke stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him cut the night chill. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't dare. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch, heavy with everything neither of them had the courage to say. At last, Clara whispered, "You'd be a fool to stay in Red River." Maybe. Luke's eyes didn't leave her. "But I reckon I'd be a bigger fool to walk away from you." The words hung in the star-swept dark, more dangerous than any gunfight, more lasting than any scar. Chapter 4, The Rancher's Threat. Morning came sharp and golden, the kind that made the prairie shimmer like hammered brass. Clara stood behind the saloon counter, wiping glasses with brisk, angry strokes. Sleep had come late, haunted by Luke's words from the night before. "I'd be a bigger fool to walk away from you." She hated how they lingered, softening the walls she had built. The saloon door creaked open. Dust trailed in with a pair of boots too polished for ranch work. Mr. Briggs filled the doorway, a broad man in a dark coat, his silver watch chain glinting in the light. His eyes, cold as river stone, swept the room before fixing on Clara. "Morning, Mrs. Hayes," he drawled, ignoring the fact she hadn't been a missus for years. "Mighty fine place you keep here. Shame it's wasted on card cheats and drunk ranch hands." Clara's grip tightened on the glass in her hand. "What do you want, Briggs?" He smiled, though it never reached his eyes. "Simple. Sell me the saloon. I'll pay fair. And if you'd rather not handle coin, there's another way you might tie yourself to me." His meaning hung thick as tobacco smoke. The glass slipped from Clara's hand, shattering against the floorboards. Her voice was sharp. "This place is mine, and I'm not for sale." Briggs leaned closer across the counter, his breath carrying the sour scent of last night's whiskey. "You think you can keep this place safe on your own? Red River's changing. A woman alone don't last long. Better you say yes now, before I make you." The sound of boots on the porch cut through the tension. Luke stepped inside, his shadow falling long across the saloon floor. His hand rested lazy near his holster, but his eyes burned steady on Briggs. She said no. Luke said. His voice was quiet, but it held the weight of steel. Briggs straightened, his smirk faltering. "And who might you be?" "Doesn't matter," Luke answered, moving to Clara's side. "What matters is you're standing where you don't belong." The two men stared across the counter, the saloon silent, but for the tick of the clock on the wall. Briggs chuckled low, though his jaw was tight. "You think one drifter can stop what's coming? My men ride at sundown. If she won't sell, we'll burn this place to ash." Clara's chest constricted, fear and fury worn inside her. She wanted to scream, to beg Luke not to fight. But when she glanced at him, his gaze was steady, unwavering, as if he'd already chosen. "Then I'll be here waiting," Luke said. Briggs tipped his hat mockingly and strode out, boots striking sharp against the boardwalk. The saloon seemed to exhale once he was gone. Clara pressed her hands to the counter, trembling. "Luke," You don't know what you've done. Briggs has half this town in his pocket. Luke turned to her, his voice softer now, though no less firm. I don't give a damn how many men he's got. You won't fight this battle alone. Clara's eyes burned. She wanted to push him away, to keep him safe from the storm he'd just called down. But the truth was, a flicker of something dangerous and sweet sparked in her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't standing alone. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying with it the promise of gunfire and reckoning. Chapter 5, Gunfire at Dawn. Dawn broke red over Red River, the horizon bleeding with the promise of violence. The streets lay empty, shutters drawn tight, as if the whole town held its breath. Dust swirled restless in the morning wind, whispering across the boardwalks. Luke stood outside the saloon, his hat brim shadowing his eyes, the Colt on his hip gleaming faint in the new light. He had oiled the weapon slow, steady, the way a man says a prayer before battle. Now he waited, shoulders broad, jaw clenched. Inside, Clara watched from the doorway, her fingers gripping the frame so hard her knuckles whitened. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice breaking the silence. Luke didn't look back. "If I don't, you lose everything. And I lose the only reason I got to stay." Her breath caught. Words crowded her throat, but none would come. She wanted to tell him she was terrified. Not of Briggs, not of fire, but of losing before she had the chance to say what lived in her heart. The sound came first, the thundering of hooves, rising like a storm. Dust boiled on the edge of town as Briggs' riders appeared, dark shapes against the scarlet sunrise. They rode in hard, rifles slung, faces grim beneath their wide-brimmed hats. Briggs himself led them, his coat flaring, his sneer as sharp as a blade. "Last chance, Clara!" he shouted as he drew up before the saloon. "Come out and hand me the deed, or I'll burn you out with him inside." Luke stepped forward, boots sinking into the dirt. His voice carried clear and calm. "You want to fight, Briggs? Then look me in the eye and take your shot." The street seemed to shrink, silence heavy as a coffin lid. Then, in a blur, rifles lifted, the first gunshot cracked, and the air exploded. Luke dove to the side. Firing from the hip, a rider fell, tumbling hard into the dust. Another bullet whined past his head, splintering the post beside him. He rolled, came up steady, his Colt barking thunder. The world narrowed to gunfire, to smoke choke in the air, to the rhythm of survival. Clara's heart pounded in her throat as she watched from the doorway, every shot ringing like a hammer on an anvil. She wanted to rush out to shield him, but she could only stand frozen as he fought alone against a tide of men. Briggs cursed as two more of his riders went down, scattering into alleys. He raised his rifle, steadying on Luke's chest. For a split second, Clara saw it. Saw death aimed square at the man she could no longer deny she loved. "Luke!" she cried. Luke turned at the sound, and the rifle cracked. The bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him but not dropping him. With fire in his eyes, he leveled his Colt and fired once, twice. Briggs staggered, disbelief frozen on his face, then crumpled into the dust. The street went still. Smoke drifted in the rising light, the last echoes of gunfire fading into silence. Briggs' men scattered, spurring their horses, unwilling to die for a man already fallen. Luke stood swaying, blood running down his arm, his chest heaving. Clara rushed to him, skirts gathering dust, tears burning hot as she pressed her hands against his wound. "Fool!" she whispered, trembling. "You could have died." Luke managed a half-smile, his voice rough but steady. "Reckon I would have if I hadn't had something worth dying for." Her breath broke, her forehead pressing to his chest. And in that moment, beneath the sunrise over Red River, Clara knew the truth. She was already his, whether she admitted it or not. Chapter 6, More Than a Kiss. The sun was sinking low when the dust of the morning's gunfight finally settled. Red River streets lay quiet again, the townsfolk peering through shutters and doorways with cautious relief. Briggs was gone, his men scattered to the winds, and for the first time in months, Clara's saloon stood safe. Luke sat on the corral rail, his injured shoulder bound in a strip of linen Clara had torn from her own apron. He moved stiffly, but his eyes never left the horizon, where the last light spilled gold across the plains. The battle had been won, yet his chest ached with a different kind of weight, the thought that Clara might send him on his way now that the danger was past. Clara stepped out of the saloon, her skirts brushing the dust, her hair loosened by the day's chaos. She carried no tray, no armored duty, only herself. She paused a few feet from him, her hands twisting nervously. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the creak of the wooden rail and the distant call of coyotes. At last, Luke broke it, his voice low. "I'll be riding out come morning. Best not to stir up more trouble in a town that don't want me." Her heart lurched. She wanted to stop him, but the words tangled. She'd spent years building walls, convincing herself she was stronger alone. But when she looked at him now, dusty, scarred, and stubborn as the land itself, she saw the truth she could no longer deny. "Luke," she whispered, her throat tight. "Don't go." He turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint leather and gunpowder on him. "You risked your life for me," she said, voice trembling. "Not for the saloon, not for the town. For me. I thought I'd lost everything when my husband died. That love only meant grief waiting down the road. But when I saw you standing there today, her breath caught, tears glinting in the last light, I was more afraid of losing you than I ever was of Briggs." Luke's hand came up, rough but gentle, brushing a curl from her cheek. His voice dropped to a gravel-soft murmur. "Clara, I don't want just a kiss. I don't want just tonight. I want a life with you. Dust, danger, all of it." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Then Clara closed the space between them, her lips finding his, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of a woman finally choosing. The kiss was fierce, desperate, and tender all at once, the kind of kiss that could burn a past ash and set the future blazing. When they broke apart, the sun had slipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky painted in fire and violet. Clara leaned her forehead to his, her voice steady now. "Then stay. Stay, and let's see what kind of life we can build out here, together." Luke's arm slid around her waist, pulling her close. "Reckon there's no place I'd rather be." As the coyotes sang to the night and the stars kindled above the wide prairie, the two of them stood in the dust of Red River, no longer alone. The saloon lights flickered behind them, the promise of a home, while the endless land stretched before them, a horizon they would face side by side. And for the first time in years, Clara Hayes smiled without fear. The sun slipped low, painting the plains in molten gold and violet, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush through Red River's empty streets. From the saloon porch came the faint drift of piano keys and laughter, life returning to a town once gripped by fear. Clara stood outside, her hands resting on the rail, watching Luke saddle his horse. His shoulder was still bound, his movement stiff, but there was resolve in every line of him. He looked every bit the drifter, the man who should ride into the horizon and disappear. Yet something held him there. Her. "You really mean to leave?" she asked softly, her voice almost lost to the wind. Luke paused, his hand on the reins. He turned, the last of the sun catching his eyes. "I've spent years riding away from places, Clara, but this is the first one I don't want to walk out of." Her heart tightened. She stepped down from the porch, skirts brushing dust, and placed her hand over his. "Then don't. Stay. Not just for me, for us." Luke pulled her close, the prairie wind whipping around them, and kissed her with a steadiness that promised more than passion. It promised home. When he drew back, his words came rough but certain. "I don't want just a kiss. I want a life with you." Clara smiled through tears, the setting sun framing them in firelight. Together, they turned toward the saloon, toward tomorrow, knowing the horizon ahead would be faced side by side.